Welcome to Jazz Forum. I'm Michael Fitzgerald, Electronic Services Librarian at the University of the District of Columbia, and your host. Our guest today is Gary Carner, who for nearly 30 years has been involved in a number of projects on the life, career, and music of Pepper Adams. Adams is best known as a baritone saxophonist who worked with some of the greatest artists in jazz, such as Donald Byrd, Charles Mingus, and Thelonious Monk. He was a longtime member of the Thad Jones-Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra and recorded about 20 albums as a leader, as well as hundreds as a sideman. Gary's new book, Pepper Adams' Joy Road, details this extensive recording career. But there's more. What hasn't been recognized about Adams is that he was also an exceptional jazz composer, and Gary has produced 5 volumes of recordings that present the complete works of Pepper Adams. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you.
It's been a while.
It has, but it's good to see you again. And I thought maybe we would start the discussion with a brief, who is Pepper Adams and how were you introduced to him and his music?
Well, Pepper Adams was born in Detroit, and he's part of that great school of musicians, of course, that came out of Detroit, including Thad Jones, closer to his age specifically, Roland Hanna and Donald Byrd and all these great Frank Foster, all these great musicians. So Pepper was born in Detroit in 1930. He ended up in Rochester, New York in 1934, and he was educated in the Rochester public schools. Got back to Detroit when he was 16, met Tommy Flanagan and Kenny Burrell at a jam session within 4 days, and his career took off. Before that, he was working professionally in Rochester, New York. So Pepper is, for me, as I mentioned before to you, coming into the studio, the John Coltrane of the baritone saxophone, because of the way in which he completely reshaped the instrument, brought it up to the level of all other instruments, playing Artatum lines, and as you would appreciate as a pianist, piano lines on the instrument, and just brought it up to a virtuosic level that had never been seen before. And all as is implied by the John Coltrane of the baritone saxophone, everybody's been shaped by his playing, who plays the instrument now. Everybody looks to him as the high water mark, the exemplar of what is being played on that instrument. So Pepper was not a doubler. Occasionally he played clarinet. His last clarinet was stolen off the bus in 1971 on the Thad Jones-Mel Lewis tour. Not sure where that was actually. It's in the book somewhere. And at that point he said, I'm just going to focus on the baritone saxophone. But just an extraordinary composer, and who's not known, as you said, not known as a composer because his recordings were so sporadic. He went so many years at certain times without recording. And but a wonderful person, actually, a big-hearted guy, very well liked. And when I first started the project, I had no trouble getting access to interviews with musicians, whether it was Lionel Hampton, Ron Carter from Detroit, of course, anybody, because they all knew it wasn't about the money, because he was a musician's musician. So it's really been a spectacular ride. I didn't know that it was going to go on for 28 years. I don't know that I'm bragging about that. But, I like to joke, and I'll even say tonight, I like to joke that, like red wine, quality takes time. as well you know.
Sure, but how did you get in? What made you say this is something I want to spend a year of my life, let alone 28 years of my life?
Yeah, that was the second part of your question, of course. I was doing a master's thesis at City College of New York, and I had an oral history of a jazz musician approved before I started the program. That was my condition for going into the program. I had already been studying with a jazz poet, Barry Wallenstein, at City College, who suggested, why don't you just get a master's in English? And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do at that time in my life. I was between an undergraduate program in music, which I took at Fairleigh Dickinson in New Jersey, where I was principally studying classical guitar and Renaissance lute, and studying privately with a teacher, John Varner, and doing something. So I was bridging that by just improving my musician chops by doing ear training and sight reading and dictation that year at City College. They had a very, very good music program. They probably still do, but it was really great then. Ed Summerlin was running the program. At that time, John Lewis was still teaching jazz history. Ron Carter had come in. He taught the second semester of jazz history there. And there's some really good players, really good people. The arranger, or the to become arranger, Frank Griffith was in my Ron Carter class. We did a report on the trumpet together. So I wasn't sure what to do. Barry said, why don't you just join the program? So I sent out 5 letters to jazz musicians, not knowing really who I wanted to work with. One was Pepper. Pepper was the only person that replied. He called me I was starting to get a little anxious because it's, you know, I was going to do the interviewing over the summer between my first and second year. And it was getting into April, I think. You know, the semester was closing, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do here? And this is before Google, before email. You know, it's all telephone. Radio registry was how a lot of people were getting the mail. But essentially, I met Pepper Adams at his home. He was coming off a very serious leg injury, which is detailed in the book. And he was just getting around with a cane. He said, look, my orthopedist will say if I can get around. He had basically been incapacitated for 6 months with this crush injury where his brake of his car disengaged and the car crushed him against his garage door. And it was really the beginning of the end. I always envisioned with this biography, the second volume of my book, that I would call that chapter Etude Diabolique because that's one of his compositions and it seems to fit. But anyway, I met Pepper Adams at his home in Canarsie, 8715 Avenue B, and we just hit it off beautifully. I brought a bottle of sparkling white wine, and I didn't know he was a drinker, so that seemed to help. And then additionally, I was in Thad Jones' son's 7th grade class, and Thad's son was a friend of mine. I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, where a lot of musicians grew up. So once, you know, we were talking, and toward the end of the first experience, when we were just getting to know one another to see if we can work together, he found out that I was a friend of Thad's son, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
He was, okay, so how was, you know, next week at 5 or whatever it was. So we went on to do 28 hours of interview that summer, and then we kept in communication. He sent me postcards from his tour of Canada and Europe, and in his tour of Europe, his cancer was discovered. Mm-hmm. I could go on forever. Why don't you just direct me so I don't ramble? But that's essentially how I met him.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess, you know, the interesting thing about him as a musician is that not only was he, I mean, he was very active in all kinds of different facets, large ensemble, small ensemble.
Right, absolutely.
And the absolute peak at both of these things. You know, he was, you know,
I'm glad
to
hear that.
So many you know, big band recordings.
Right.
Obviously the Thad and Mel
right.
recordings, but all these studio dates, all these things. And I guess, you know, like maybe was Kenton his sort of first?
Kenton was his first band, as detailed in my book Joy Road. It was Oscar Pettiford who, quote, strong-armed Pepper into the band. It was Pepper wasn't sure he wanted to be in the band. Pepper told me he wasn't even sure Stan Kenton wanted him in the band. But Oscar Pettiford, sure enough, wanted him in the band, and so, you know, Oscar was that kind of guy. If Oscar decided he was going to do something, it happened. He was a very, very strong-willed dude. But yeah, it was Kenton that really got Pepper to the West Coast initially in 1956. Mm-hmm. Then he was written up for the very first time in the jazz press by Ralph J. Gleason, and that led to him. Well, first of all, it was a 5-month tour starting in May of '56. By around Thanksgiving, he left the band and formed a quintet with Mel Lewis and went to L.A. and did a tremendous amount of recording there. Got to know a lot of the players down there, Ray Brown, for example, Leroy Vinegar, mm-hmm. And then came back with Chet Baker a year later after first going with Maynard Ferguson to the West Coast. And that sort of got his career going. Prior to that, he was a Detroit guy and was just starting to get heard in New York. And quite frankly, it was tough. I interviewed Kenny Burrell, and he said it was hard getting heard, but fortunately, they went to jam sessions, were heard in New York City. Yeah,
I mean, you would think it'd be probably even harder for a baritone saxophonist. You know, how many you know, notable baritone saxophonists, you know, you count on one hand.
Well, thank you. That's exactly right. I mean,
is certainly, you know, one of the top players, and such a different approach to the instrument, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very, very individualized. I like to say that that 3 notes and you know it's Pepper. Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a stylist. Todd Kuhlman, the bass player, was quoted as saying to a friend of his whose name I can't remember, said, "How lucky you were to play with Pepper. He's one of the only stylists we have. I mean, there's Monk, there's Pepper. how many stylists are there where, you know, they're so radically different from everybody else? And he really was. And he was always pushing the envelope in being radical, although staying within, I mean, he wasn't a free player. He was still what I would consider a traditional jazz player, you know, playing changes, certainly. But he was very versatile in playing all genres. He recorded with Latin players. His tunes work as Latin tunes. Wrote a lot of Latin tunes, wrote 42 compositions. My book says 43, but I've recently learned that Kiani Zawadi wrote one of those tunes.
Oh.
So it's now 42. But it's been an honor to do this. It's been extraordinary to go around and you know, do this work on Pepper. It's just been extraordinary.
You know, you've sort of taken sort of an expansive approach to. I don't want to say, you know, you're not just researching, because you're also producing, and you're also going out and looking for new and different ways to present the music in contexts that had never been. I guess maybe he'd imagined them, but he certainly hadn't even presented them.
Yeah, that way. I think speaking about Pepper's imagination, one of his unfulfilled wishes at his death was to have lyrics written to his ballads. So it was one thing to record all 40, or formerly 43 of his tunes in 4 CDs. That didn't take a huge leap of imagination, but it was a very gratifying project to do. But I just realized that I had to do this 5th CD, which just came out. Alexis Cole's the singer. It's under her name, but Jeremy Kahn did the arranging with Pat LaBarbera and Eric Alexander, and it turned out so beautifully. I'm so proud of it, and so I was fulfilling. In all instances, I try to be consistent with Pepper's wishes. So this fifth project was fantastic. I guess I'm getting a little caught up. You know, my imagination is running amok, quite frankly. I've spoken to some musicians, a really fine drummer out in the Bay Area, Ron Marabutto, who was sort of a de facto godson of Pepper's, and Pepper took him under his wing because Pepper was very close with his father, John Marabutto, the pianist out in the Bay Area, who was on the date that Pepper did. Actually, it was the first recording that he did at all. It was Mel Lewis's first date as a leader called Gotcha on the very little known San Francisco label, now, you know, obviously what isn't reissued in Spain. But I think I've lost my train of thought. But yeah, all these projects, it's getting very exciting. It's just it's a function of how much money I can raise, really.
And you have the support of the estate, and how does this work? You get to, you know, obviously you knew Pepper and
I've had the support of the estate. The actual recording projects themselves I've self-produced. My mother passed away a few years ago, and she left a little money, which allowed me to use her estate money for Volume 5. Now it's solely Kickstarter at this point, and groveling.
Well, you have the encouragement of the estate.
Oh yeah, and the encouragement of the musicians and all these people that knew Pepper as well. Yeah.
And you know, in addition to, you know, doing that, obviously we've got one book that's out now, which
correct.
To call it a discography is not accurate, but it's also not a biography. The biography, as you said, is going to be Volume 2.
Correct, and that will be the last book. Yeah, and probably the last book that I do as well. I feel that it's going to take quite a bit of my time, and I do have a day job. So this is actually what I first envisioned doing when I went to the English program at City College, to essentially create a thumbnail biography through the oral history of Pepper Adams, ultimately Pepper Adams. So there's a lot of material. I've gone on to do about 200 interviews with jazz musicians, many of whom you know, friends and family as well. So I have that body of material, and a lot of that material is in this book. You know, some people have called it a biodiscography. My editor calls it a biodiscography. I called it an annotated discography, because a biodiscography is sort of, you have as you know, you have the discographical listings, and then you have biographical, connective tissue. And that's not what this is. Really what this was taking information about the recordings that were kind of germane to the recording specifically, and putting that in.
And obviously because of his long career. This is virtually a complete Thad Jones, Mel Lewis
Yes.
discography
Yes, it is.
as,
It
as
is.
well.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled to see that we're not just talking about, okay, here's the information about the records that were issued.
Right.
We're talking about broadcasts, we're talking about private tapes.
Correct.
We're talking
correct.
about all kinds of things. And then to have those stories, as you say, the annotations,
Right, right.
the stories behind this gig or
Yeah,
this tour.
yeah.
And in some cases, it's like a day-by-day
It
account
can be,
of
yeah.
tours.
Yeah, the book is almost 600 pages, and I probably could have pushed it up to the size of a Torah, for example. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. Thank you. Yeah.
And because this is someone who was he was a leader, but he was also a sideman. You get a lot of perspective. If you're not focusing on Pepper Adams, if you were researching Thad Jones, well, this is a great resource. This
Well,
is
thank
something
you.
to
Better you to
be
say that than me. But yeah, or Monk, or some of the seminal recordings that Pepper was on, and he was on a lot of seminal recordings. You alluded to that in your introduction. I mean, Lee Morgan's The Cooker. That was one of the recordings that a lot of musicians cited as the place where they first heard Pepper, because that was his first recording on Blue Note. And then, I mean, the first actual session for Blue Note. The Blue Note took over the transition dates, the Coltrane date, ultimately, and that preceded this. So yeah, it's sort of Mingus, that town hall concert, all that, remember all those pages about Clark Terry talking about the town hall concert, and it's quite amazing, actually.
And so you're talking about someone who was so active and so really vital to the New York scene.
Yeah.
In the 50s, 60s, 70s. This is someone who was there practically for all the major events, and you really get to see how active he was and how influential he was on what was going on at that time. It's every page you turn, you say, again, this great event. He was there for that too.
Gosh,
and
I should take you on the road with me, man. This is great. But it is true. Now I can't say he was really a studio musician. He finally got into the studios with Atlantic, and then did some session work, starting in about '67, '68. Aretha Franklin. He's on all the famous Aretha Franklin cuts from '68, '69. All the things we can mention. But pretty much stopped working in the studios at about '72, '73. He was a frustrated soloist, man, and I say that because he just didn't have the opportunity to get out as much as he wanted. He always considered himself a soloist, and the book details the fact that he did not want to be in Thad's band at all. He wanted to break away because he was stuck in big bands, whether it was Maynard Ferguson's band, whether it was, of course, Kenton's band, whether it was the various things he did with Quincy Jones, Benny Goodman. He even did a 1-month tour with Woody Herman, just to get him from New York to, I think it was Cleveland, so he could join Donald Byrd, and start their tour. We should probably talk a little bit about Donald Byrd, who just passed away, and a person I didn't have the chance to interview. He and Elvin Jones and Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea are probably the 4 people that I most want to interview, and obviously I'll only have the chance now to do 2. But Donald and Pepper had that wonderful quintet. It was co-led, but it was under Donald's name because he had the contract with Blue Note, and they had just I don't think that band's really appreciated, quite frankly. I think it was one of the great quintets of its time.
I'll tell you, my personal favorite record of that. I think one of the ones that introduced me to that was the Catwalk.
Yeah. Yeah, with Philly Joe.
Philly Joe Jones. And
I think was Sam Jones on that, or Lehman Jackson? Lehman Jackson. Yeah.
And
it's extraordinary.
Just a wonderful combination of personalities on that record.
Yeah.
And all of them really at the top of their game.
Well, you did the discography of Duke Pearson, of course, so
That's true.
So you would know clearly what Duke was doing on that day. I mean, Duke was, besides Donald Byrd, the composer for the band. Pepper really didn't have a chance to write for that quintet, although they broke away and they did do a recording for Bethlehem, where Pepper did some writing on that. But just amazing writing, amazing playing. It allowed Pepper really to be heard, and I think it really helped his career dramatically. But like I get back to the frustration. Pepper continued. He finally broke away in 1977 from the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra, and he was able to do that, I think, principally because he got married for the year before, and his wife had a very solid job as a social worker, working within a private school in Brooklyn, New York, and finally there was the stability for Pepper and the base for Pepper to sit down and compose. And then, fortunately, I think there was a time at which the American dollar is really strong against the currencies in Europe. This is before the euro, of course. And Pepper was doing a lot of touring, and he did what so many musicians have done. He didn't move to Europe, but he toured a great deal there and really got heard. And Pepper said it was really in Europe where it's just like Phil Wood said in Jazz in Exile.
Yep.
You know, you got to go to Europe first, but they don't care if they haven't written about you in Downbeat, you know. So he was known, and he started touring a great deal with George Arvanitis and a lot of pickup bands. It was very difficult for Pepper back then to, you know, the bands weren't what they are now, of course. The music wasn't as international, but what a giant of the music, really. It's just really exciting for me.
Well, speaking of tours, you're on a tour now, and you've got some more things that are planned. What are some of the new ideas that you have for taking around the country and the world?
Well, my book is being reissued in paperback, so I'm really gratified by that because I have not made a penny on the book because it's all gone to the cost of indexing. Because when you work, even if you're working 28 years and you work as staggered and paced as this sort of has been, there's always the mad dash to finish. You know that being an author. So I knew, even when I got the contract many years ago, I wouldn't have the energy. I anticipated I wouldn't have the energy to do the index after such a tedious book like this, which is a discography. So I always wanted it to get into paperback, not just because I'd get some remuneration, but also because people would have an affordable book and they'd have a chance to see. It'll be in the bookstores. It's good for Pepper's career. People finally know how great this music is. My future plans are to promote the paperback edition, which is coming out this summer, and to get back on the road and also travel with an arranger who I've commissioned to do 22 big band charts of Pepper's music for Volume 6, which Volume 1 of which we've done already with the University of Illinois with their faculty as soloists and rhythm sections. So University of Illinois has got one of the great programs in the United States. And it was a very cost-effective way it was really the only way I could figure out to hire a big band. So that'll be the part of the tour, you know, doing that recording and then doing lectures and taking the arranger around and doing clinics and what have you.
And I think it gets that music in front of young players.
Thank you. That was the plan.
You know, unfortunately, you know, we need more of that.
Correct.
It's not so common that they're playing the top quality music.
Yeah.
And to have that available to them as an opportunity is a wonderful
Well, that
thing.
was the strategy. It's one thing to go on a book tour and it becomes, you know, as Andy Warhol would say, my 15 minutes of fame, but then it goes away. You get written about, you're heard a little bit, but it's very important to get the music out. So, yeah. By the way, on my website that I run, pepperadams.com, we have a secret place where we have embedded the lead sheets of Pepper's tunes. So I show that when I do lectures because, furthermore, I want people to play the music. And we have all those lead sheets in Pepper's hand, but we have it in a secret place for copyright issues, of course. So we can access it when we want.
Got it.
But all that stuff is available.
And you know, you said you've had the ballads have lyrics now.
Correct.
So there's no excuse for singers.
Correct.
And
Alexis Cole is doing a folio of all tunes, all 7 of his ballads in all 12 keys to make it available for singers, which is wonderful. So that'll be available, and she's also going to be at the Gen Conference, as I will be in Dallas in 2014. So there's that. Correct.
Great. When you think about all the 28 years, you know, what were some of what was one of the biggest surprises for you when you were doing this?
Doing the research.
Yeah.
The friendships that I made. I got very close with Tommy Flanagan, which was an extraordinary experience for me. I remember one wonderful experience when I went to see his trio in the 80s and he wanted to know what I was doing after the gig, and I said, come on. So we hop in a cab and he go to the Vanguard because he wanted to check out Benny Golson. And I think he was he recruiting Lewis Nash at the time? I can't remember what it was. But you know, I'm still a fan. Sure. I mean, come on. You know, I've been collecting since as a kid, and just I had to pinch myself because here I was walking through and being waved through the Vanguard with Tommy Flanagan. It was just, you know, those sorts of things really were wonderful. Other surprises? Oh, I don't know. I think I'm really surprised at how well the CDs turned out that I produced. I had no experience as a producer at all. I just tried to pick people that worked with Pepper and knew his music and loved it. But I'm very gratified with the way people assumed the project. You know, took responsibility for the project, and hopefully I'll have future success with volumes 6, 7, 8, and 9 if I get there. I mentioned earlier to you, we're doing hopefully a string quartet project, an octet with string quartet. Hopefully I can get George Mraz back on the project, and hoping to do something with Lou Tabak and an orchestra if I can ever raise the funds. I've got Bevan Manson, who did the octet arrangements, who is now doing a clarinet concerto for Eddie Daniels. Oh. So I know the work he's very, very talented. I know him from New England Conservatory, and a solo piano date is in the offing too.
Okay, well, this all sounds wonderful, Gary. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
This has been Jazz Forum from the University of the District of Columbia. Our guest today has been Gary Carner, jazz researcher and author of the new book, Pepper Adams' Joy Road, and producer of the 5-CD set of the complete works of Pepper Adams. I'm Michael Fitzgerald. Thanks for watching. See you next time.